So it is currently September 1st, 2020 in the late evening. The polls in Massachusetts have closed for the Senate Democratic primary, and it appears that Edward J. Markey has won his primary re-election bid against his challenger, meaning that in November he will go on to face a Republican in the general election in a very, very heavily blue state. Now, this can be said about a lot of the incumbents this election season. 13 of the 35 Senate seats up for re-election this year are in safe areas. However, it's not so much the general election that's interesting. In fact, you could probably make the argument that it is one of the least interesting races to watch this year, but the primary that caught the attention of political junkies and think piece pundits alike. And that is not because of Markey by any means, but because of his challenger, Joe Kennedy III. So Kennedy announced his bid to primary Markey on September 21st, 2019, and for the past year he has given no clear answer to the question that's been on everybody's minds, and that I'm going to try and answer in this video. Why? So first, let's take a look at who these two candidates are, why they matter, and maybe we can get somewhere. Edward J. Markey began his national political career as the congressional representative for Massachusetts' 7th District, and served in that position for 19 terms. 19! Before running in a Senate special election in 2013 to replace John Kerry, who was resigning in order to serve as President Obama's Secretary of State. He has held this seat ever since, serving as the junior senator for the state, the senior senator being Elizabeth Warren, who made herself famous this election season in her own right, both for her presidential run and for the gruesome murder of Michael Bloomberg on national TV.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
So Markey is a political progressive. He has been the co-sponsor of the Green New Deal and ranks as America's 5th most liberal senator, behind more household names such as vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris and the ever-present Bernie Sanders. All in all, Markey is a well-respected senator with close ties to his Massachusetts roots, and he offers a progressive voice for all of his constituents in the Senate. And now for the challenger. Joseph Patrick Kennedy III is the current U.S. representative for Massachusetts' 4th congressional district, a position he has held since 2013. While he has co-sponsored a few relatively uncontroversial civil rights bills, the main thing carrying his political career is obviously his name. Joey here is a member of the Kennedy political family who has produced American politicians such as his grandfather, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, Senator Ted Kennedy, most famous for the Chappaquiddick incident, and of course the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. The three men I listed are brothers, making both President JFK and Senator Ted Kennedy Joe Kennedy's great uncles. The family name dominates Massachusetts politics. In fact, no Kennedy has ever lost a statewide election in Massachusetts. That is, until now. And it's pretty clear that his name alone won Kennedy his House seat, and I can only assume he was hoping it would work its magic again for his Senate bid. So Kennedy has actually had a few blunders over his relatively short 7-year political career. Most famously, his vote on the amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which would have curbed President Trump's ability to develop nuclear-armed submarines. Shockingly, Kennedy voted against the amendment, essentially siding with Trump, which is not very progressive of him. He was later called out on Twitter for this, and his best explanation that he could give was that he, quote, meant to vote yes, and it was an honest mistake on his part. So that's pretty reassuring for someone who wants to make up 1% of the most powerful legislative body on the planet. Kennedy has also struggled to show any sort of level of bipartisanship. The best example of this was within the final debate with Markey, when both men were asked to list 3 Republican senators that they admire. Markey, of course, had no problem listing this because he's worked in politics for decades.
Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who I partnered with on opioid legislation. Roy Blunt from Missouri, with whom I partnered on Alzheimer's. legislation, and John Thune from South Dakota, with whom I partnered just in December to ban robocalls.
But Kennedy, on the other hand, didn't take the question too well.
Three current Republican senators.
Oh, Ed. Man.
But independent of his name, the only thing Kennedy really brings to the table is his age. At 39, he would have been elected America's youngest sitting senator, unseating Missouri Senator Josh Hawley for that record. So because of this, Kennedy tried to center his campaign around generational change, sort of trying to tap into the youthful energy that was seen throughout the 2018 midterms, which saw a group of young progressive voices, often called the Squad, be elected to the US Congress. However, the de facto leader of the Squad, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, has since endorsed Ed Markey, and the famously moderate Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has thrown her support behind Kennedy as more of an establishment-y type figure. And this may have done more to hurt him, in all honesty, because this series of endorsements frames Markey as the more progressive candidate and Kennedy as a moderate, which is not something you want when you're trying to run to the left of your opponent. So now that we have the two candidates established, let's try to take a look at why this race even happened. So the obvious thing to point to is Kennedy's pure political ambition. He certainly sees himself as more of a JFK type figure, Patrick J. Kennedy. And if you don't know who Patrick J. Kennedy is, he was a congressman who was in there for a number of years, but eventually was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and he wandered off into the sun. So Joe clearly sees himself set up for great things, and he's most likely looking for the easiest way to move up the ranks. So that leads us to another question. Why not wait until an open race? Running against a popular incumbent senator is far from a sure path to victory, and given that Markey will be 80 years old by the next time he's up for re-election in 2026, you would think Kennedy would want to hold off his run until then. But that brings us to what I assume is the logic of the Kennedy campaign in this situation, which is Kennedy would fare better running against the incumbent than actually having to win on his own merit in a open primary. In 2026, Kennedy would be running for a seat that is safe for a party that is increasingly younger, more diverse, and more progressive. And because of that, he may struggle to stand out amongst all the possible other candidates, most notably another member of the Squad, Representative Ayanna Pressley, or according to some other speculative reports, former Governor, Obama best friend, and 2020 presidential hopeful Deval Patrick. So in the mind of Joe Kennedy, the only way a young white man could be seen as the more intersectional choice is if the opponent was an old white man, which leaves Markey's likely final run for the seat to be Kennedy's best shot. Also, if he was able to become a senator in 2020, that would let him set himself up quite nicely for a potential presidential run in 2024 or 2028. He could easily run in 4 years if Trump is reelected, or if he could primary Vice President Kamala Harris, who would likely be the 2024 Democratic nominee due to the fact that Joe Biden has said he won't be running for a second term if elected this year. Or in 2028, Kennedy could run if 2024 saw a Republican win the White House, say perhaps Nikki Haley, but I couldn't see him trying to primary a sitting President Kamala Harris, although then again, he did just spend the last 12 months trying to do something equally politically unlikely. But anyway, that's all conjecture. Kennedy has now lost both his potential Senate seat and his actual congressional seat, because Massachusetts law says that you can't run for both positions at the same time. So maybe he will go the way of Patrick J. Kennedy after all. Or maybe he'll bounce back and reclaim his seat in 2022. Either way, Joe Kennedy III is the first Kennedy to lose a statewide race in Massachusetts, and that's gotta sting. So now that we laid that all out, we can finally try to answer the question of why did Joe Kennedy challenge Ed Markey? Well, I think the answer is ultimately quite simple, that being just pure entitlement, privilege, and the belief that your family name can bring you to power. But what's more interesting is the fact that so many people across the country were that invested in this election. Ever since 2016, we've kind of had this attitude that nothing in our politics can surprise us anymore. So ironically, seeing something so pre-2016, like a political dynasty trying to win a seat purely on name recognition, seems really bizarre to us. It just goes to show how much our politics in this country have changed recently. I think both Trump on one end of the spectrum and Bernie on the other have both sort of galvanized this populist energy that's been sort of sitting in the underbelly of American politics for quite a long time now, and I'm not totally sure we can put the genie back in the bottle. And that's going to eventually hurt candidates like Joe Kennedy, who tried to run as the blue-eyed boy of the political yesteryear and eventually got nowhere. But anyway, that's just my take on America's most interesting non-presidential primary for this election year. I don't know, what do you think? Do you follow this sort of stuff at all? Do you have any idea about Massachusetts politics? While researching this video, I found it so interesting that they elect so many Republican governors. But hopefully you learned something from this video. Maybe I gave you a little bit more political insight, or maybe these ramblings are totally irrelevant. Either way, let me know what you think down below. And finally, if you like this sort of content, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you the next time I think of something like this.